Bizarre Reality Media.
Indiana County 911. My brother's gone. Can you be a little more specific, sir? He took my brother. Who took him? I don't know who took him. I don't know what. Sir, take a breath. Explain to me what happened.
And I looked out and there was this big red blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on. They're not dogs. They're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found a skull. I think you guys are going to want to come film this.
Put him out. Put him out. Put him out. Put him out. Put him out.
I just see it.
Sightings of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said there's a monster on the wall.
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin.
What is up, Bizarre Society, and welcome back to the most bizarre show on the internet. I am the one that some refer to as Shane, aka the original Shane Squatch. And alongside me, as usual, I have the big bad Boo Daddy himself, Sir Orin Felix. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. And thank you for having me as always tonight. And piggybacking off of last week's episode, since you are the original Shane Squatch, have you ordered your Shane Squatch 69 Michigan Dogman baseball jersey yet?
Ooh, I have to. You know what? I've been actually laying down the groundwork a little bit. So my birthday is coming up in April 14th, of course. So I've been telling the family, I'm like, hey, you guys know there's a Michigan baseball team called the Michigan Dogmen, right? And I keep saying, I could use a really nice baseball hat. Michigan Dogman would be a really cool baseball hat to have. So I've been trying to lay the groundwork. I'm hoping that maybe they'll end up getting me one. But if not, maybe I'll wait till towards the end of the season and try to pick one up on clearance because I think they're selling them for like $60. But regardless, at some point, I will end up with a Michigan Dogman hat. Otherwise, I don't know what. I'll flip out. I'll find a way to do it. Even if I have to buy one off of eBay, it's just something I have to have in my hat roster.
You definitely have to have it. It sounds like you're being like Ralphie from Christmas Story, like laying down hints.
See, it's one of those things that it's like, as a grown man, you just basically buy yourself everything that you could possibly want. So it's like, sometimes there's just little things that you're just like, hey, it'd be kind of cool if the family bought me that, because then it's like special on another level. So it's like, yeah, I could go out and buy the hat tomorrow, but it'd be a lot more special if my kids bought it for me. So I gotta lay the groundwork.
There you go. All right. So as far as news and updates today, I think all we've really got is our next episode of Bizarre Inquiries. Our YouTube live show is going to be April the 2nd. It's a Thursday, roughly 7:15 Eastern time on the Bizarre Reality Media YouTube channel. So you guys make sure you submit questions, comments, videos, articles, anything like that you want us to inquire about, and also join in the chat during the episode.
And if you guys might be interested in sending us any of that, being a guest on the show, sharing your bizarre encounters or experiences, or contacting us for any other reason whatsoever, you guys can do so through email, which is bizarreencounters@outlook.com. Of course, you guys can hit us up through social media. That's always a great option. For any professional inquiries, you guys can hit us up at bizarrerealitymedia@outlook.com. And if you guys are interested in calling or texting, if that makes it a little bit easier to do it a little bit less professional, a little bit more personal, you guys could always call or text the Bizarre Reality Media hotline 24/7, and that number is 313-364-1551. And if you guys happen to miss any of that, it is available down in the show description. Considering that we were recently talking about new Chronology, Tartaria, on one of our recent deep dive episodes that Orin had actually covered, without further ado, I figured that we should have somebody who would come on and really start to cover the topic of Tartaria. So, what not a better person to do it than Ari Asulin himself from Paradigm Threat. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Ari, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Shane's told me a lot about your work and your research, and like you said, it's very timely considering we covered some of these topics recently on the show. So can't wait to pick your brain and hear about some of your research.
Definitely. Always glad to go over it.
So I guess a good spot to start before we start getting into the meat and potatoes of the conversation, really starting to dive into Tartaria. Of course, you have to give a little bit of credit to your website and the awesome research that you put together. So before we get into it, of course, man, why don't you let people get a little brief description about what Paradigm Threat is exactly?
Paradigm Threat is a online repository, meaning a Git repo of a bunch of files, mostly markdown files and images and media. And it's too big for videos. So I've been collecting as much images, as much text as I could find, snippets from there, here, there, people's write-ups that submitted them actually, and my own theories and timelines. And I did this because basically, as I mentioned before, the internet sort of ballooned with a huge amount of information in the 2000 to 2010s, and then hit major censorship, around 2011, 12. And then since then, all that stuff's just been gone. And I began just collecting it, organizing it, and eventually came up with the idea that finding enough information that I found really solid to start to put together a serious project, which is the Paradigm Threat Timeline, Human History of Earth alternate timeline, based on certain authors that have really fleshed out their theories, but have not, put the whole thing together. The whole thing's kind of waiting for somebody to do. So aside from a repository, the alternate history timeline and the book that I'm actually planning to release on it is my main project.
And I know that part of that timeline, of course, is Tartaria, of course. And we ended up covering this a long time ago on Inquiries, and we ended up doing it as this giant series where you basically started at the beginning of time. So I know Tartaria, it's kind of hopping right into the middle. But if you kind of want to give people a brief premise of what exactly led up to that, so that at least people are caught up to speed on what Tartaria is exactly.
Totally. The first time I ever even heard about any of this stuff, it wasn't hearing Tartaria. It was hearing the accusation that the Roman Empire might not be all as legitimate as we were told, that its location might not have been necessarily, Western, Central Europe and Italy and so forth, that those places were vassal to a much bigger world empire called Tartaria, or the Rus Horde Empire from Flamenco, its new chronology. It came by many names. It's also known as the mythical kingdom of Prester John, and the mythical Eastern kingdom that a lot of people thought existed in the 16th, 17th century, and then 19th century they no longer believed it. So the truth is that Tartaria wasn't necessarily in question in historical records. It was that it was actively suppressed in all creation of historical records. The modern creation of the records that we know today, which nobody really talks about who exactly compiled them or what, traces back to Roman Catholic Church and some Protestants, schism between the Jesuits and the Protestants over the timeline, essentially. And this one person, Joseph Scaliger, was the main author of the timeline we know today, the one that's taught in schools. So Flamenco says, hey, a lot of authors came before me, N.A. Morozov in particular. And they all said the same thing. They said, history as we know it is not a scientific history. It's almost like a pop culture, pop science. It's first of all, the biggest factor was the victors of all the wars who were in a position to write history. That started with the Crusades and ended up with Latinization of Native America and so forth. And lost train of thought, but essentially, man, I might as well just get into the timeline because that's where I'll sort of get back to the point.
Go for it, man.
The timeline starts with not with Flamenco's new chronology, which is a big criticism. That's what I was trying to get to of Scaligerian chronology. That's all very complicated and tied into geopolitics and stuff. For example, just I'll highlight really quickly. We're at war with Russia right now. The whole West is trying to be allied with war and in support of Ukraine against Russia in what some people dub World War III, but I would say it's the fourth major world war if you count 1812. Well, we're just trying to destroy Russia for some reason. So until that's over, we're not going to be able to get to the bottom of who's being objective and who's writing history for the purposes of geopolitical conquest, giving themselves kind of authority in modern times. And that's Flamenco accuses everyone. I mean, Chinese, CCP, Americans, everyone of rewriting history for purposes of power game. So before Flamenco, I might as well start sharing. We have to get to the early history. How far back does history really go? It's 100,000 of years of human history. It's 4.5 billion years of Earth, existing, and 13.8, billion years of the universe and all that. And how do we get to all that certainty anyway? So real fast, this is my website here, Paradigm Threat. As you can see, it's a timeline this isn't the main website, it's just a timeline. And I put together what I consider the timeline of Earth history starting in 5000 BCE, going all the way to modern day. And this is a much shorter timeline than you're going to see anywhere else, because essentially certain authors who talk about this era and certain authors who talk about this era do not agree about what happened in between, the blip. So I'll get to that in a second. Really fast on really fast on Saturnian cosmology. Don't need to cover that too much, but the reason why my timeline starts with that is because essentially we need to get to the bottom of the creation story of Earth, because the creation story created all the religions, all the empires, all the law and order, all the spawned the currency and the authority to issue currency, all of it. So if someone's lying about the origin of Earth, they're probably going to be lying about how the Earth is, pushing their crimes back into the ancient past, like the Mayans, 100 years into the past when their civilization collapsed. When Fomenko says, no, that was only about 200, 300 years ago. And the Mayan collapse happened at the exact same time as the Native American collapse, and for the same reasons, cowboys versus Indians, just sending the cavalry out and getting them. So I'm getting a little bit ahead here, but one author, Peratt, essentially talks about the before creation time of 10,000 BCE, and you can check my timeline to go into all details of how this is supposed to work. But the main point is that there's a cosmic timeline, and the cosmic timeline, the core concept of all this, is that solar systems cycle actually very quickly. They when the planets essentially die, they run out of energy, fuel, whatever you want to call it, and become lightweight. They run out of heavy elements, become lighter, and gravitate to the edge of the solar system where dead planets are found. The solar system becomes ripe for new planets to form. And in our case, in our solar system, we had our sun create Earth inside the sun. This is confirmed by electric universe theory, by Jerkin's negative electric sun model, and a bunch of others. Walt Thornhill, you can check out Electric Universe for him. And he describes the process. Fusion occurs only at the surface of the sun. Hard elements gravitate towards the center, bake into planets, get heavily cooked. At some point, the planets pop out of the sun's surface. And I actually have a video showing this. It happened in 2004. This is apparently a frequent occurrence. The suns create these sort of seedling planets, shoot them out of the solar system, where they either fall apart or they're captured immediately by another host. Has to go from host to host. Sun's body to something else. In our case, it was a dwarf star, brown dwarf, that you could actually describe Saturn as a brown dwarf today, except for the fact that it's part of our solar system, so it can't be. But it has all the properties of brown dwarf. It lets off its own heat, and it's incredibly light. So it's like essentially the mother in this situation, and the seedling is and impregnates the brown dwarf, which itself changes within its electromagnetic balance and becomes a positively charged body, harboring a planet that's starting to form all the elements needed for life, but no life yet, because we're essentially primordial. We don't have any energy yet. Saturn connects to the sun. You get let there be light creation event that every civilization remembers. And big clue, if every civilization remembered the creation event, that means they were spawned before it happened. So Bible gets that wrong. Bible says man was created 6th day, sun was created 2nd day or something. So let there be light happened, the first or second day. So almost every other civilization says, nope, we saw the life forms spawn and we spawned from them, like Mayans, the Africans. They all talk about the southern man, the first man figure, the essentially 3 plasmoids in the southern sky that look like a man. It was made of Uranus, Neptune, Mercury, and was shooting out this material, which the Norse mythology, for example, remembers as a realm too hot for anyone to stand, but the life was created from the droplets. So essentially, all these mythologies point to the same thing, that the Golden Age and the Prior Age actually spawned life. And it wasn't necessarily because of a any kind of deity or anything like that. It was because essentially scalar energy, which is a suppressed science, by the way, suppressed in 1918 by the Rockefeller and the something agreement. I actually have it down. They weren't allowed to teach about this anymore since 1918, or rather, they weren't allowed to fund it anymore. So scalar energy disappeared. But like I said, Anthony Peratt basically covered all of those petroglyphs in the southern hemisphere of the Earth. And he pointed out very interesting facts, like all those petroglyphs are pointing to the southern hemisphere, like whoever carved them, like millions of them all over the southern hemisphere, were pointing at the south as if they're pointing to something down there. So the first man, essentially, the golems that are described in mythology, they're born out of clay, born out of metal, so essentially were totally possible by the first man arbitrarily forming in the sky and creating the same kind of scalar patterns on the ground. Not just a man, but everything, snakes and four-legged creatures, six-legged, winged creatures, etc. So moving on ahead, you got the Golden Age, you got the Dark Age, which is the falling apart of the collinear configuration, chaos on Earth, can't see the sun anymore or Saturn, big test of faith. The Atlantean society, remembered by Plato, goes underground, Atlantis falls, and they still try to get people to continue to worship their religion, but it's kind of hard. So there's a lot of Baal worship and a lot of children sacrifice in those dark ages. So we get to the blip. It's very interesting. This is my theory. The blip is essentially, if you do the math, the calendars that describe the jumps of each configuration, recorded throughout mythology. Jeannot Cook, one author, goes into great detail about the jumps. They were not gradual jumps from 255 days to 320 or whatever it was, 25 was a jump. And one of my other theses was that it actually mirrors exactly atomic physics when electrons jump. It's the same thing. External influence, internal jump. So the blip, basically a simple argument. It's you stop the BC calendar at the last jump, 670 BC, last time that Mars hit Earth, and first time that we got the 365 plus final orbit. And then you go all the way to this whole new chronology issue where people are accusing the Catholic Church and other people of confiscating anything from 300 years to 670 years to Fomenko's 1,053 years. And he says that they just kind of used the "in the year of the Lord," the iota, as a number. They said, oh, that's one, so 1,000, really a simple trick. And then I say, well, you add those together, you get 1,723 years that are essentially never happened. So I call it the blip, kind of like, in that movie, in the game.
We apologize, guys, for the interference, but we will be right back. And now back to the show.
So now we're finally to Tartaria, and the reason why Tartaria is such a big deal is because it was a race from history, represented the major threat to what some call the deep state, or I call the pyramidal empire. It's all those pyramids they set up. You still have a bunch of pyramids today, actually. We got all of these really big contradictions about the creation of Christianity. We have these rumors about giants, being all over the planet until they're wiped out around 200 years ago by something. So Smithsonian Museum covering them up. We got the Bible, the Codex Gigas Bible. That's a very interesting contradiction that still is a mystery today. Nobody knows why such a huge Bible was created, written. The official explanation is they needed a really high resolution copy for the smaller copies. Okay, it's just, you'll find so much of that in history, just so much like poor explaining contradictions.
We find that with almost any story. We cover so much stuff that they come up with these ridiculous solutions that seem like they're simple answers to people, and everybody says, yep, that must be the simple answer. That must be what it is.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So Christ, obviously central figure in the creation of the Sword Empire. Even the Russians try to downplay this because nobody wants to say these kind of things anymore. The narrative of Christ has become such a disproportionate religion of itself when it was merged with monotheism, that to even utter what the potential real story could be will just sound like blasphemy to everyone, atheists, monotheists, you name it. But here it is. Fomenko outlines that this whole thing happened 12th century, because of the blip, and that this was the first time that modern human history can start, that people saw the constancy of the calendar. I have a whole article on constancy because the whole idea was that people could start lying and saying, that sun was always there and the moon was always there. And we're going to just backdate all of these, thousands of years to show our authority over, this new world under the sun. And this is exactly what the deep state did. I would say deep state because they were underground at the time. Very hard to come out. Nobody was listening to them. Monotheism was almost entirely extinct at that point, with polytheism spawning from all corners of the earth on its own as a result of all the chaos with the gods that have just recently disappeared and the emergence of the one god that drove them all the way, just like in just like in the Camelot story. And with this sun worship and the back foundation of polytheism, there was just no way the deep state could say, hey, please worship our now invisible God, make sacrifices for us, let us control your food, your money, circumcise, and who knows what else we're going to ask. We're going to want to rule you in every way it's possible. So, this plan was going slow and go. It's happening in Istanbul. It wasn't happening in Palestine. There's no record of any of this activity over there. And actually, the Palestine history is something else entirely with the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So in surprise, surprise, Crimea, that place that, we just fought a war over recently, that place that Russia retook in 2013 now? And then in 2017, they actually released some of these maps and said, hey, here's some old maps of this region, just FYI. Why are we doing this? Oh, because we're a little worried that the West is trying to destroy our culture again, and this was like right before the Ukraine situation blew out of control. So you can see how this is still very much, in play today. In Istanbul, Fomenko makes it clear they created a Jerusalem temple modeled off of the scriptures they had showing the temple in the sky and Saturnian cosmology, mostly just the six-sided hexagon that was seen then on Saturn, that was also seen today. If you look at the North Pole of Saturn, it's still there. And also makes like the kippah and stuff. And the Catholics also wear it on their head. And they just modeled Jerusalem off of it. 3 levels of walls, 6 gates each. So you got 666. The creation of that number and the association with everything from paganism, which is what all of this was remembered as, and was it the Sephiroth, the geometric? It's in the OT, and I'm not too familiar with it. That mentions the 666 number a lot. So moving ahead, what happens in this situation? Christ was nothing special, but in my opinion, he was a giant. He was one of those giants that we're talking about. And let's see, I have a good picture of that. And what they're doing was they're doing a census of giants. They're basically saying, we want to find out how many giants are in each region. We're going to send out a bunch of armies and kill them. The narrative that we get from the New Testament today is that Christ's mother Mary traveled to Jerusalem region for a census. Now, it's a contradiction. It never happened in any other history. No one travels for census, and a pregnant woman especially would not be required to. And then she was not allowed into a inn, and all kinds of weird contradictions from the story. Got the Holy Lance and Holy Grail, and no one knows where they came from. So all of this is clarified with Fomenko's version, although he doesn't accept giants. So just to understand where he and I differ on that. But he makes it very clear the Caesarean section that was in the chronology, in the Russian chronology for the character he associates with Christ, Andronicus was his name, at least in Latin. The Caesarean was done on his mother, and for that reason, she was called a virgin, and that's the reason. And the term virgin has been lost completely, as the Protestants in their prudeness completely reimagined Christianity as this sort of, stay away from sex and don't talk about it kind of religion. And they started saying that virgin is anyone that has sex, and it's like, well, excuse me, back in the day, no one ever talked about that or gave it away. It wasn't a thing. that came up much later. That was like in Italy and stuff where, there's a lot of arranged marriages and people want to know if people are virgins. This was, and they never found the technique, by the way. This is something that's completely been, phallocentric, chaos in that region. But it affected the final versions of the Italy, right? Of the texts that were put out by England and the Vatican that basically said, virgin means anyone had sex, and Mary never had sex, and therefore Christ came from a virgin, and it must be God. And that was like the reasoning. So in reality, I think it's very easy to understand if Mary's family was dealing with a genocidal census, that she was not going to tell any of them any more about any of the rest of their family. She's going to just not talk at all about who the father was. And where Fomenko and I sort of differ on this story, I see the Christ Revolution as so much more significant than just the foundation of Russian Empire. Christ was seriously a threat to the deep state's religion, and he didn't mean to be. And it's not because he's any kind of enhanced deity or anything like that. It's a completely regular person aside from being a giant, but because of this weird situation where they captured a giant that was pregnant and decided to give a cesarean, you can see the deep state was interested in trying to convert giants too. As long as they're
Ari, I'm sorry, just to jump in and clarify. So, please. In your opinion, you think Jesus's mother, the Mary figure, was a giant as well?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay,
and that's and that investigation I have there. You can go to my site, look for Harry Mary, to find a bunch of context of her being constantly depicted in paintings as naked, full of hair, out in the wilderness. And by the way, these bots are helping me confirm and cross-reference this stuff. I know it sounds crazy as I'm saying it. It sounds crazy to me too. But if you look into some of these investigations, like the fact that the Western, Catholics and Protestants both accept that Mary at one point went off into the wilderness, went insane, and lived without clothing. Okay, so if they accept that, then it's not controversy. It's not even conspiracy. It's just up to interpretation, really.
Awesome.
Like I said, the Russians.
I'm sorry to derail you. I just wanted to clarify that.
I love questions like that, and please, because I need to find weak points in this and continue investigations there. But yeah, I'm kind of firm on the giant theory because essentially what happens next really lines up. And these pictures are ridiculous because AI and stuff. But you got to understand that Fomenko places the crucifixion 10 years before the crusade, the first one. That's 10 years. He says it's a revenge crusade. It's revenge for crucifixion. It wasn't 1,000 years later when a bunch of people decided to go after Arabs and bear the cross for no reason because it had nothing to do at that point with crucifixion. No, it makes a lot more sense this way. And in that event, where Fomenko makes it very clear this is the same event as the Trojan War, he points out that in the Trojan War references, in the Greek references to the same event, you essentially see that there's a lot of references to huge men and mighty men, and even claims that they are of a species that came from Mars, another planet. So, the interpretation there in Roman mythology is born from the gods. But an easier interpretation was breakaway human civilization on Mars since the Atlantean times. It has never been a dead planet ever, still isn't today. And that essentially there was a conflict on Earth between the large and the small. This is the birth of communism. Communism has always been out to erase anything separate about humans. And they had to start early with all the different kinds of humans out there, because I'm sure you heard all the Sasquatch stories and all the different species out there that still don't want to talk to civilization, knowing exactly what happens if they're spotted. And I'm just suggesting that this battle has gone on for a very long time. So Revenge Crusade, a bunch of giants, also known as the Children's Crusade, insolently attack Istanbul. Istanbul was totally set up for this. They knew to do this. They had this bridge and this moat, and you had to cross the bridge over the water and go over 3 walls of ramparts to get to the center. And so many giants died and got captured. But after 10 years, they came up with the Trojan horse. Fomenko actually thinks the Trojan horse wasn't actually a horse. It was a misinterpretation of the word horse, which also meant a water canal at the rears of the castle, which was left unguarded. Okay, that's a nice theory. But I say, you know what? Trojan horse makes a lot of sense in the giant version of the story, because the people in the castles didn't anticipate that the giants had smaller humans allied to them. You see the complexity of this. The giants built the horse, put the smaller humans in him. No one had any idea was happening. Put the horse in the castle. The smaller humans do, open the gates, which they can because they're built for that size. So I'm just going to kind of jump ahead here. The Flamenco makes it clear that the First Crusade, after 10 years alone, smashes Istanbul and defiles it. Takes all of its precious documents and idols and actually learns a lot of stuff. Part of this stuff was from Christ himself, who was trained directly by the rabbis. And what's very interesting is the legend of Shingo, which suggests that essentially, if you go to Wikipedia, you'll find this page on Grave of Christ in Japan, Shingo, Japan, suggesting that he actually lived to be something like 76 years old, and that when he was 23, Christ traveled. No, sorry, 106 years old. Oh, I really undersold it there. When he was 21, this gravestone site says today that he traveled to Japan for divinity lessons for 12 years before coming back to Istanbul and getting completely effed over for what he learned in Japan. So you can see that the Japanese even remember a different version. And their version is Isukiri, casually takes the place of Christ on the crucifixion. A lot smaller humans don't really realize it's happening, don't really care. They just wanted to punish a giant. And it's a deception. It's a deception that allowed Christ to survive the crucifixion, to reappear in the same region for months and talk to those apostles and say, yeah, I'm still here and you should still disobey the church because they're evil. He goes back to Crimea. They all follow him. He creates the Rus Horde Empire. Many of them attack in revenge of the brother, and that continues off into the east, into the west in Istanbul region. Istanbul sort of creates its own empire that's remembered later as the Ottomans. The Rus Horde is the real center, though. It's the headquarters of the entire empire with everything else being vassal to it. So how does this empire get created? Essentially, Christ survives crucifixion. He lives for 106 years in Siberia. He has all his teachings from the deep state directly from their Istanbul Jerusalem church, and he has all the wisdom he had from clashing against their attempts at social control, domination of everyone. He said, never again, we're going to create a republic of the people under the Tsar. So because there's a Tsar, Protestants never accepted that he actually created a republic and as erased from history. But the Olympics started there. It was all about getting people to get along. It's all about giants again, testing everyone's strengths. The original Colosseums were all built in the East, destroyed, rebuilt in the West as tourist locations. I know the Italians will never accept that, but it's okay. Moving ahead, the great Mongol Slavic Rus Horde Empire, or Tartarian Empire, expands throughout the whole world, creates all of those amazing cathedrals you find everywhere. This is the birth of the Masons. Masons got their name directly from the fact that they built all these things and had a secret society that you had to be initiated into. 33 years was their degree, obviously is modeled after Christ, with the memory of his death after 33 years, and or rather, just the challenge to the church that happened at that age. You can see it many different ways. They all followed the steps of Christ and tried to get to his level of education at 33 years old. Remember now, Christ said that he would tear down the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. So we're talking about a giant with mason abilities. We're talking about concrete. We're not talking about lifting stuff. Flamenco makes it very clear. All these structures, concrete. It was known back then. So it was one of those many philosopher's stones, chemical combinations. It built all the pyramids, so you don't have to come up with weird mythology of slaves dragging giant blocks across the desert. And where did they get that stuff from? No, it's all very clear that the Masons built all this stuff with technology that has now vanished. 15th century Ottomans, something really bad happens. 3 generations of Christ lineage ends with the court takeover by essentially Protestant infiltrators who say, that's not the emperor, that's the emperor. And this happened under, I forget, Peter the Great. I might get the wrong emperor, but no, that's later on. That's 17th. So what happened here was as the as the Rus horde Tartarian empire spread all over the world, including America, Mayan civilization, all those amazing structures and pyramids that no one knows who built them, there was this schism, this religious disease schism spawning in Europe, where they had all the brothels still. They actually had giant brothels designed for giants. It's ridiculous. And they had venereal disease, birth of venereal disease. It was only unique because it was the first disease to spread rapidly across the Rus horde travel chains, with the horses and carts and the rats and all that, and immediately spread back across those lines, crossing the many gates they had of security, because they didn't want those Europeans in there with their usury and their disease, not to mention, and the fact that they're all just genocidal against giants to begin with. But they couldn't really stop them from having sex all the time, and the venereal disease created such a scare that the Rus horde empire said, "Fine, you know what? Go ahead, Ottomans, take whatever steps you need." So 1492 was the date chosen, and I have a theory that it matches the Exodus date. It's my reverse Exodus thesis. You can look at it. They chose this date because, well, they could move the BC date wherever they wanted to, so they chose the date. But if you look at Fomenko's interpretation of 1492, he says this is where the Book of Revelation came from, not from a prediction of the future necessarily in our lifetime, but back then. And the Revelation letters were sent to all the churches, and they said, "Prepare. There's going to be a major culling. The 4 horsemen are going to show up, representing the cavalry. Nobody's seen horses before. I believe this is where the word nightmare came from. The night raids of these horses were the scariest things the Europeans had ever experienced in their entire history, till even today. And these horses showed up, raided villages, killed everyone, and burned everyone. Why? Because the priests had conflated. By then, monotheism had seeped very, very deep into the Rus horde empire as center, and while it was still polytheistic, and it was not obeying the 10 Commandments yet. That stuff came later. Remember, first commandment, don't obey any other gods before me, which tells you that they were polytheistic back then. Those same monotheists basically said, yeah, this is all God's punishment. It's not just a disease or anything. It's not science. It's religion. So that conflation basically caused them to turn into a genocidal campaign. Europe was, whoa, I'm going to talk about that. That was the brothels. Europe was attacked by the Ottomans in that time. And 1492 is also the date when Europeans fled Europe, especially Spain, and came to the Americas, created a bunch of colonies, founded all of these places based on monotheistic principles, as much as the Democrats don't want to admit it, and I don't like it either, but let's face it, America and all that was completely founded on Judeo-Christian monotheism. And they're all escaping Europe to do this, sort of preserving what they consider their Old Testament version of their religion, preserving it a lot of the cases through oral tradition. I'm Jewish, by the way, so I've been hearing this my whole life, that all of my traditions came orally at some point through pogroms, annihilations, and displacements. And you can totally see why, like the Spanish Protestant version of Jews that were driven out of Spain at the time by the Rus horde version of Jews, which were polytheistic and totally different, Gnostic Christians. They basically they trace back to ancient Egypt, or whatever you want to say happened in the Dark Ages, and back to Atlantis. So yes, their escape to America was actually the preservation of their religion, and the Rus horde empire was trying to stomp them out, hated their version of monotheism and their circumcision and so forth. And eventually, let's see. Let me get to this one fast.
All right, guys, we got to take another break. We'll be right back. And now we're getting back to the bazaar.
What the precursor to 1492 invasion, Ottoman invasion, the reason why they could do this is this amazing story, 1421, of a meteorite falling on Yaroslav, very close to Istanbul. this is presented in many predictive programming fiction, Conan, obviously, but so many others where, star metal came from the sky and landed on the ground, smelt it into weapons, and used it in battle. They did that. And the Ottomans had the Bulat steel, the famous Damascus steel that could cut through all other metal shield swords. So they just ripped through Western Europe with their horses, and horses with a new thing there, breeding really fast. And within 1 year or so, you have a horse that can travel very far. So back to my point, I believe that preservation in America is so much more profound than anyone's stated. I have this whole theory about the lost tribe of Benjamin, who in the Old Testament disappears when the other 12 tribes destroy, or 13, I don't know, annihilate them, right? They're all erased by the rest of the Jews. It's ridiculous. So it's like, no, that's not what happened. It's interpretation. They disappeared. They were gone in Europe. No one saw them again. They went to America. And I have this weird feeling that Benjamin Franklin has something to do with this, because he was devoutly religious and he was in the perfect position to just rewrite all of this into a brand new religion and reality. All these occult symbols that reappeared from Egyptian times, London, DC, Vatican, spires, all appearing in Americas and London at the same time. So moving ahead, the Rus Horde Empire was in big trouble and starting to crumble from within. And essentially, pull up my timeline here, you have the Romanov family that is very close to the royalty and the court, and all of the famous stories of Shakespeare actually depict these stories, like King Lear and so forth. Hamlet. Fomenko translates them directly on a timeline and mathematical basis to these ancient stories. It's retelling in a Protestant format of what happens. Basically, major betrayal at the highest level, and the king fell sick, and the Book of Esther covers a lot of it, where the Jews were afraid that they're going to, the monotheists, are going to be wiped out by this guy Haman, and they had to get this woman, Esther, to gain the confidence of the Tsar, the king, the Pharaoh, whatever, to turn the tide against Haman and his people, who were then annihilated, not the Jews. The Book of Esther ends there, but Fomenko says it continues. The Christians, the Cossacks, and their generals that had that were leading all those Ottoman empires and Ottoman armies in the past were still there, and remembering all the ancient traditions, were not about to allow their capital to fall victim to this Romanov takeover. So they fight back and eliminate the Jews, and that's the beginning of pogroms for hundreds of years in Russia, where you basically don't see any Jews there much anymore, and you don't even see circumcision. It's like the only country in the world where it's like circumcision rate is like almost nothing. It's like only foreigners and so forth. So this whole Romanov thing is the beginning of the erasure, the real erasure from within. A lot of books and so forth were starting to be regarded as in the so-called Renaissance, the Reformation of the Protestant West, regarded as fantasy or embellishment, or even worse, there are accusations of some essentially false dogma that the aristocracy created for themselves to be in power, the basis of books like Emperor Has No Clothes and so forth. And for 300 years, you just had this decline of Tsardom, once regarded throughout the whole planet, even Americas. Remembered in Mexico, by the way, the MSCK is the same consonants as Moscow, and that Fomenko makes it very clear that Mexico was once just the capital of Moscow and remembers all the same memories. It was wiped out in that whole, like I said, Benjamin Franklin led American erasure, manifest destiny, create your own reality, erase everything, interpret everything however you want. Boy, I've seen this behavior a lot in my lifetime. I took Hwarang Do martial arts, right, and had to find out that the organizer of this martial art was lying and stole a lot of it from Tang Soo Do, and a bunch of accusations flying as to who's telling the real story of ancient histories in Asia and so forth. It's very common that victors and rich people would act that way. It's in the Godfather movie, where that one guy who stole all that stuff from, czars and kings, and he's obsessed with Russia. Won't get into that too much. So Romanovs essentially are the beginning of the end for the so-called Tartarian Horde Empire. And Tartar, that's just a slang that people would call a remote region. It's not anything they would call themselves. Just like Barbar for the barbarians, for the coast of Barbary Coast and all that. These are named by Western Europeans for the purposes of highlighting that, these are uncivilized people.
We had talked about this recently, even with India, that a lot of the ancient Greek texts use this term of that's over in India, and everybody thinks it's a specific country, but it was just talking about all the primitive area over the Indian mountains.
Exactly. India is actually translation. It means the far land, and you see many maps that has the word India marked in many regions, especially the Arctics, because that's the farthest land of all. and those regions were inhabited. And some of those maps say the fire lands in the Antarctic, and the flat earthers seize on that. They're like, see, we told you. And it's like, no. Interpretation. The fire lands, let's get into that fast, are the lands that caught on fire every time the European ships showed up. This is well known in history. This is the fires that are light to keep them away. Why? Because they knew exactly what those Europeans were going to do to them. So they burned the entire forest every time they showed up. So, they're remembered as the fire lands, but they were just regular places. Interesting that they weren't full of ice back then. So to the history, 17th century, very interesting. You got this weird date, 1666. Nothing special because of that one, right? But if you take it away, then you have the year 666, another anticipated apocalypse day, well anticipated. Not just in London, but you also got that Jewish prophet who, oops, that's my cat, who basically said, during our lifetime, we're going to see Jews return to Jerusalem and so forth, and Lord will reveal himself in this year. So it wasn't just London, but London had the worst of it. They had this whole situation with the Great Comet. Showed up in 1664, and you just have to imagine this Great Comet, like that game Final Fantasy VII, just, oh no, here it comes. And it's like, oh, and there it goes. And it's like, well, it wasn't ever going to hit. But it scared the crap out of everyone and allowed the priests to sort of, seize the moment. And they said, we told you, right, that God is so mad at you guys for what they considered their what's the word they used back there? Vulgar? They called everything vulgar. Your vulgar language, your vulgar, arts that you play and your music. And they just didn't like any of it. So they said, God's punishing you guys for all of it, frankly, right now. And when the comet disappeared, they're like, whew, that's gone. But then the Great Plague showed up, and it just sort of wiped like a big chunk of the population of London out in the region. And many people did accuse the British aristocracy and their soldiers of, or the mercenaries, whatever, of planting the virus, although no one knows where the heck this brand new, extremely lethal virus came from. I mean, my suspicions go all the way to Mars, but I won't get into that. I mean, I find it weird that an asteroid showed up in that time, How hard would that have to accomplish? I don't know. But the point is that the worst thing of all happens, the Great Fire of London, on that perfect date in September 6th, something, I forget now, on 1666. Yeah, September 6th. The fire started earlier, of course, but it reached its peak on the 6th. And once again, it was accused, the royalty was accused of starting it. They benefited from it majorly, and they even said so. They said, glad all that racket was cleared up, and it was their fault for, being so vulgar and having sex and stuff outside of the orthodoxy of the church, right? Church is supposed to control that stuff. So they took advantage in that moment. And Charles II, who essentially was causing a major civil war, I think he was assassinated. I forget now. I have to go into it again in 72. And the Bank of England was created to shut down the people who he was up against. His main threat, the main threat to the church, aristocracy of London, was the gold exchangers, and not just Jews, but anyone that basically had the parental authority to exchange gold. Not everyone did. Usury was still banned, especially in London. So the gold exchangers had to get completely eliminated for this Bank of England to show up. And boy, does the Bank of England have the weirdest history. 300 years of just chaos, mayhem, starting wars. They're worse than Switzerland. And just the fact that they're associated with the Church of England, another thing that never should have happened. There should never be a church and state merging on such a level, but it happened. And the bank and the Church of England are essentially aligning all of that aristocracy and religion together into a final authority of London that they're imposing over the entire planet. Everyone. It all began here in this moment when the church took that power. And from that moment, you see the same situation repeating everywhere else. France, Civil War, or rather French Revolution, preceding a major empire. The British Empire, of course, was raised in the 17th and declined in the 20th century after World War II. The French Empire was short-lived, but it also followed that Civil War and the French Revolution, where the aristocracy used sort of a false flag narrative that, you know, they're out to get us to shut everyone down, eliminate any sort of militant groups, and impose law and order in everyone, and then conscript everyone into a giant army and prepare it for an attack against Russia. So this is the major Protestant plan that's been attempted over and over and over, but it all started in England. It was then they divided and conquered there first by separating out essentially the vulgar from the Latin. And if you knew Latin, you were connected on high. You could do the money, the religion, the science, the health, the history. All of it was encoded in Latin.
Could that
King James Bible.
Oh, I'm sorry, but could that be some sort of euphemism for like the mark of the beast, perhaps? Because I've heard stories about, you know, I can't remember. I believe it was the Emperor Nero is considered to be the Antichrist by some alternative chronology followers because of, you know, him putting his symbol and his face on money and whatnot. So as you were saying that just kind of, you know, raised flags in my head. That sounds very kind of mark of the beast-ish to me.
You're absolutely right. I'll tell you why. Because back in the day, 666 was a beloved symbol, a central symbol of a religion that had no real evil in it, honestly, not in my opinion. And then it became the mark of the beast. Mm-hmm. So how's that happen? Well, you had the real thing once, and then you had the blasphemers, right? Obviously, the beast must come from the most horrible corruption of all religion, which is essentially what I just described happened in London. It wasn't just the King James Bible or the introduction of Latin that nobody could read even till today. It was the association of this year, 666, where this was all revealed. And ever since then, anyone with any sense knew that something serious, real had happened. Not mythology, not religion, something that we should all be concerned about. Mm-hmm. And it became this rumor, you know, like Sauron's, like this rumor that the beast has revealed itself in the year 66. Its mark is, in the year 66. That's been forgotten, but the mark is now 666. That has not been forgotten. So you're absolutely right. So I'm going to get to the most important moment, in my opinion, of all of Tartarian Rus Horde history. It's the rebellion of Pugachev, completely overlooked in history, because as Fomenko says, it's been buried in layers and layers of redaction, with the final layer being nothing more than a mini peasant rebellion led by an idiot who claimed, for absolutely no apparent reason at all, that he was the heir of the throne, Peter III, and that there was really a real Peter III on the throne. Now, Pugachev talks slightly about this because this is very touchy, but Catherine the Great and who's the other guy? I forget now. Catherine the Great was regarded as a very important figure in Russian history because she brought the West to Russia. Mm-hmm. But in some perspective, she basically eliminated Russian history and replaced it with a very miniaturized local region, negligent, bunch of stuff happening that did not affect the rest of the world. That's basically her contribution. And Fomenko says that he doesn't really say that there's any truth to Pugachev was the name that somebody gave to this person who claimed to be Peter III. We don't know his real name. But he does say that the real Peter III was probably a fraud. So it's not hard to say that Pugachev may have actually been totally the heir. And it's not, in my opinion, that Pugachev was a giant, represented the last remaining Siberian giants who had been part of Rus Horde Empire, had never been eliminated by the West. So they didn't create castles in that region. Castles are for eliminating giants, by the way. And there were so many left that they were able to, resist any kind of real challenge from within. Mm-hmm. So this was the final challenge where the Romanovs had finally spent their cred and they were about to flee the country. which they did. Most of their family and their court people started moving west. A lot of them went to Ukraine and stayed there. And this rebellion happened, which I believe was the last great battle between giants and smaller humans, where Pugachev could not be defeated, and he was threatening the autonomy, the authority of the deep state in every way, by claiming to be heir to an ancient empire, which could easily resurface if they had a chance. He could not be defeated in battle, and what I believe happened as a result of this rebellion was, because even Fomenko cannot understand or figure out why, but Siberia and all of that region that had those ancient maps showing all those ancient regions is gone. It's just not there anymore. Current maps of Siberia show something else. Looks kind of like a wasteland with huge temperature differentiations, giant holes in the ground that explode for no reason apparent. It's a weird, bizarre area, Siberia. And in my opinion, it looks like it's a apocalyptic wasteland. It's been destroyed. So the mud flood, which doesn't necessarily suggest that Siberia was destroyed in such a way, does suggest that mud spilled all over the earth. So all I'm suggesting is a lot of that mud came from Siberia, that Siberia was targeted by something, probably a directed energy weapon, probably by human breakaway society on Mars. As a result of their control of Earth finally shattering in a real serious way. Regardless of if that's true, there's this huge just blip in this region where no one really understands where, the giants disappeared, if they ever existed. The orphan train started, the beginning of the genocide of the Indians, which, by the way, started in 1753, way before Tale of Tears, in New Jersey. You can see how they're preparing to consolidate Native Americans into reservations, and stepped up in the Trail of Tears, which was this weird event much later when there's a bunch of red-skinned Native Americans lying around that are easily rounded up, couldn't defend themselves anymore, had no more buildings or technology or anything. And they just routed into Trail of Tears into reservations as they're known today. There's that big mystery of why was their skin red. The Mormons absolutely believe that that's what happened, but they believe that that was God that punished them and so forth. Instant fossilization is a very interesting concept that is covered partially by the Sapphire Project. I've said this a few times, but I was wrong. There's Sapphire Project doesn't do the experiment of fossilization specifically, but Peter Mungo Jupp does. And this was not really so much of an experiment as a location of tree stumps that had been hit by lightning and power lines, and they were just like hit by electricity over and over and over. And he said, look, part of the trunk is fossilized. It's actually a fossil now, and it happened rapidly from electricity. So I combined Peter Mungo's theory with what the Sapphire Project does say about electric petrification. They say it happens at atomic level, kind of transmutation of elements, which, in other words, they're proving that alchemy is real. It's just that you need some really high energies to make it possible. So there you go. The restored Tartarian Empire became a complete myth, remembered as many different things, spread out all over the place, like as Indian memory, as an Asian memory. Of course, the Asians remember that they had an empire in that region that went back, to BC times, and the Russians believe that they had an empire, but only to about 1000 AD. So you can see how, like, the Russians said we started our history 1000 AD. And right next to them, the Chinese say they started like 2000 or 4000 BC. I forget now. And the Jews 6000 BC. See how everyone was competing against Russia on all academic levels and just saying, you guys are small. You guys are Prussia. You guys are everything else. Paris, PRS, all that stuff had nothing to do with you. And plus, if you do believe any of that stuff, and if you bother to be belligerent about it, eventually you know what's going to happen. World War III, World War IV. So if you do look at the current crisis with Crimea, you'll see that, sorry, not Crimea, but Ukraine. You'll see that Ukraine has banned the Russian Orthodox Church in their region, shut down the ancient churches in their country. Nobody does that. And that kind of thing's usually not acceptable to Americans who mostly don't realize it's happening. But you got to understand how that religious schism is so deeply entrenched in that region. And the iconography gives it all away, with the Ukrainians having very different iconography in their churches, weapons and swords and lots of cannons in memory of these ancient battles where they were victorious. And you don't want to forget that. And the Russians opting to say, you know what, we prefer books, we prefer our religion. Greek Orthodox Christianity is very different. Although it's been mucked with, it sort of represents a lot of the old values of an ancient Christianity that was headed around a female, Christ's mother, as the central figure, something that was completely lost in the Protestant Reformation Revolution, but is still remembered in Judaism today as the way that we pass tradition down, from mother.
All right, guys, this is our last break, so hold on tight.
And now back to the show. Ari, this has been absolutely fascinating. I don't feel like we have enough time for me to ask like all the questions I was writing down, but I'm just going to pick one. So the whole Harry Mary concept, I think, is really interesting and really kind of fun to think about. Yeah. And I was just wondering your thoughts on, maybe a connection with this concept and kind of the whole Nephilim idea, because, a lot of people say, Nephilim, fallen angels, and there's a Bigfoot connection there, and people go a lot of different ways with that. And I was just kind of curious your thoughts on any possible connections with all that, and kind of more broadly, do you think that the Nephilim mythology kind of plays into any of this Tartaria and the Roman or Russian horde ideas, and if so, how?
Oh, absolutely. Let's try to find a good picture here. But yeah, there's a lot of depictions of Mary Magdalene as, a giant, because you can see that there's smaller humans standing next to her. Mm-hmm. And I was going to say about that. The evidence for giants is kind of overwhelming once you go further east and you look at the building structures. At the doors are tremendous in size, and they're not just decorative. So essentially, can you ask your question again? Because I sort of spaced while I was looking for that picture.
Oh, no problem. Just kind of to make it as quick as possible. Do you think the whole Harry, Mary, them being giants, Jesus and Mary possibly being giants, has any connection to like the Nephilim mythology?
Oh, right, sorry, Nephilim.
And how a lot of people connect Nephilims to like Bigfoot mythology and things like that nowadays.
Oh, totally, yeah. If you look at the direct translations of Nephilim in the scripture, you'll see that they mostly represent really amazing colossal humans. They don't really represent deities that much. My best example is the Book of Mormon, where they're actually called Nephites. And in that one, they're just, they're not described as anything, deity-wise. They're just really important people who are the ancestors of Christ and of the Mormons themselves. So yes, Nephilim absolutely feature large in Old Testament mythology. They are up for interpretation. Like I said, if you come from Judaism, you'll know that a lot of this stuff has not really been defined. It's just they sort of teach it to you. But like I had to, run down the Exodus, and you don't learn everything. You just learn about it. This is what it was at the end. And Catholics are actually forbidden from interpretation. So I would say Nephilim completely open to interpretation. Some people kind of took advantage of that and went kind of wild, I think. But yeah, that's all they were, giants.
Awesome. Thank you.
See, I tried to bring up those pictures of Harry Mary while you guys were talking, but yeah, a lot of those interpretations of that, there's like the angels that look like they're like normal size next to her, and then it looks like there's even like depictions of like people that are about normal size next to her, and she's drawn in like the typical like Sasquatch form. Like, let me try to bring it back up here for you guys.
That's the big giveaway. Yeah, it's the hair, honestly.
Let's see where it's at.
And then that weird corroboration in the Protestant New Testament and Catholic, that she had gone into the wild, and was naked and lived in the bushes. It's like, well, okay, that's how they explain all of these pictures, by the way.
Yeah, here's like a bunch of different interpretations, but in almost all of them, yeah. I mean, other than this one, she's about the same size as the angels, but that's totally an interpretation. But I mean, almost everything she's depicted as significantly bigger. And even just like look at the feet. Like, just a prime example, like, it just seems like that's like a typical, like, almost like Sasquatch motif with like enlarged feet on top of that, which also falls into the whole Nephilim concept. And just to throw it in here, let's see, out of curiosity, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I don't
5
think you gotta
toes?
show more than that.
I was going to say, I'm kind of curious if you're going to be able to count 6 toes on some of these depictions, because it almost kind of looks like you might.
Some of these paintings were doctored. I'll tell you that.
Say that one.
Jamaica goes into details about that, how there's been plenty of studies to show it.
That one has 6. Actually, there's one right there. That one has 6, right? Am I counting that correctly? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Found at least one.
I have bad vision.
I have bad vision.
But yeah, there's a lot of reasons to believe that, honestly, that the Nephilim and all that really were just a larger human species. They weren't anything special. They breed with humans, and during the Golden Age, essentially, different planets had different size, growing at different speeds, and on Mars they grew really big, and on Earth they didn't grow quite as fast.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess before we wrap stuff up completely, do you have any other things you want to pop in with, Orin? Because I saw you taking a bunch of notes as we were going through that whole thing, so I know you got a couple more good things on there, man.
No, that was the main thing I wanted to ask. Everything else I think I can save for a follow-up, but I wanted to make sure I got that one out of the way.
You got it.
As I usually say at the end of the shows with you, Ari, you cover stuff so... you almost cover every single detail as you're going through these things. It almost kind of makes it where you get to a point where you're just like, man, you covered almost every single intricate detail. It's like, I don't even have too much more to throw in on it, man.
It feels easier every time. I love the practice.
Well, Ari, before we kind of say our goodbyes, would you mind telling us a little bit about the book you're working on and when we can expect to see that?
Well, after I realized that I can use AI agents to do extremely powerful, I'll say, cross-referencing, citations, reading of books, translating of books, you name it. It's all just like seconds now. I've realized that I can actually do a serious project. Most of the stuff I wrote before I used agents had a lot of my own personal flaws, interpretation issues and stuff. So yeah, I'm dyslexic a little bit, so I got some mistakes. But now that I got the accuracy of the agents, double checking everything, I realized that I have a fully cited, fully documented, extremely compelling book here. I already read over 300 pages of it. In fact, I'm trying to keep it smaller, as small as I possibly can. And I'm really looking for help. So if anyone wants to, test read it or give any kind of feedback, that would be really awesome.
I'd definitely be up for reading it. It sounds absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, same here, man.
You bet. I'll send you guys the links.
Awesome.
Well, I guess kind of starting to wrap up with it too, man. If anybody wanted to come and check out your timeline, they want to check out Paradigm Threat, they really want to start to get into this stuff and dive into it for themselves before your book actually comes out, where can people come and find your website? Where can people find your timeline? And where can people even contact you if they may even have further questions?
You bet. My website is paradigmthreat.net. Sorry, that's hard to pronounce or spell. And if you go to it, you'll see all the repository. It's been rewritten, rebuilt. At the top of it, you'll see timeline. And on the very bottom of the page, you'll see my contact information, which almost stuff's on GitHub. So GitHub's the best way to contribute to any of this. You can contribute documents and, make comments and text and all that kind of stuff can be done on GitHub.
Well, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to really break this down for our listeners. It's always an absolute pleasure to dive into your research with you, man. And almost every single time I chat with you, man, it seems like you're redefining this timeline even more and you're just getting it more and more precise. And I'm really excited to see the book come out. And I'm really excited to see where you actually get to a stopping point with the timeline where you feel like you finally have it complete.
I know. Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much, Ari. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And hopefully we get to talk to you again, maybe after the book comes out.
You bet. Anytime.
All right. If you guys are interested in supporting the show and all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes, Shayn, tell them what they need to do.
The best way that you guys can support the show is by checking out our Patreon. We now only have one tier available, trying to make it easier for you guys because nobody wants a million different subscriptions. But if you guys are interested in supporting us for less than a can of soda, maybe about the price of a candy bar, $2.50 a month, you guys can do that. And if you guys are interested in seeing what it's all about, there's a 7-day free trial available. And if you guys like it, hopefully you guys stick around.
And you guys can also check out the Bizarre Reality Media merch store. That's still a tongue twister, but they've got t-shirts starting at the absurdly low and oddly specific price of just $15.68 plus shipping. Oh boy.
I got to do the me sings every time now. That's just going to be a standard from now on. I was like, do I have that button on my board? I didn't know, but I just went for it, man. It could have been almost anything, but nope, we got the me sings moan.
Perfect.
And I know that times are tough out there, but if you guys are interested in supporting the show in some other ways, one of the best ways that you guys can do that, and we haven't received one of these in a long time, so we would definitely appreciate it, is by leaving a review or rating on any podcatcher that you guys happen to use, Apple, Spotify, whatever. And what is the general rule for that, Orin?
1 and 5 stars only.
And of course, with that, you guys will either get our love and appreciation or you'll get ridiculed. But either way, it'll be fun for us. May not be fun for you, but I guess it's the way that you interpret it.
And piggybacking off of that, if you guys want to share the show with your friends or enemies or family or anybody that you like or dislike, that's always appreciated. And if you think anyone would really like the show or really not like the show, hey, just shoot it their way and see what they think.
Only way the podcast grows through grassroots support from listeners just like you guys. So thank you.
Or unsupport.
Or
There still
unsupport.
listens, right?
And if you guys want to keep up to date on the show, Orin, how can they do that?
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook and just do all the internet things. You guys know how the internet works.
And of course, if you guys want to catch live shows or video content, you guys can always go and check out the Bizarre Reality Media, TikTok, YouTube, and Rumble channels.
And you guys be sure to show some love to our awesome friends and sponsors of the show. We've got our buddies Rick and Hans with I Know Squatch for all your squatchy gear needs. And we got our buddy Joe with Crypto Theology.
For what?
Your wearable cryptids.
There it is. And if you guys have a little bit of extra time, you guys can also go and check out our friends with affiliate links. We got Dimension Devices if you guys want to pick up some paranormal investigating equipment. And we also got Sticker Mule if you guys need some t-shirts, stickers, or anything like that for your guys' podcast, community, anything like that. And of course, there are some additional discounts and credits available for you guys down in the show description.
And as always, everything we've mentioned is down in the link tree in the show description.
And as usual, I have been the one that they call Shayn Squatch.
And I have been the big bad boo daddy, Orin Felix.
And just as usual, I have to remind you guys, every single episode, so I'm going to do it this one, just like every other one in the past, always, always remain and stay bizarre, my friends. Bizarre. Bizarre.
What in the heck is a mud flood?
Grab his dick and twist it!